Hello and welcome back to For You. Nikki and Reese return and we're traveling back down to Da稻埕today, where Taipei shows off its historical architecture.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about 大稻埕 and its history.
Yeah. It started as a port for traders, where merchants would come and sell their things.
From Western countries and Eastern countries, they all gathered together here.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason why the architecture or the buildings around that area are a mix of different countries' styles.
Yeah, because those merchants, they need their own places to sell things. So they need to build their own kind of structures.
Yeah, and it makes for a really beautiful melting pot of different architectures. And nowadays, with modern architecture, Da稻埕has some old buildings next to some very new modern buildings, like that glass tower. Super interesting. Well, today we're going to continue learning about Da稻埕, its history, and the architecture you can find there.
Reading.
大稻埕, where Taipei shows off its historical architecture. European Baroque style buildings. This is one of the best examples of the influence Western culture had in this part of Taiwan. This style features elements of Baroque, such as fancy facades. One such example is the Qian Tianlai residence, which was built in the 1920s by a rich tea trader. Red brick Western-style shophouses. This style is very specific to areas where foreign trade took place. Western companies would export Taiwanese products around the world, so they built their Taiwanese bases. Locals also used buildings like these for selling goods, especially along Dihua Street. They would live in the same building, hence the name shop house. Hokkien Ding A Ka. While some buildings found in Da稻埕are Western style, others are very much Asian. In Ding A Ka architecture, the upper floors extend to the roadside, but the ground floor is recessed. This leaves room for shops and a sidewalk, and the upper floors gain more inside space. Many tea shops made in this style can be found along Ganzhou Street.
So the article begins by introducing one of those architecture styles you might find in Da稻埕. It's called European Baroque style buildings. This is one of the best examples of the influence Western culture had in this part of Taiwan. This style features elements of Baroque, such as fancy facades. Ooh, sounds so elegant. But first, let's talk about the word element. Element is a noun, and an element is an essential characteristic or part of something abstract. Abstract means not physical, more like an idea. So the elements of something are the different things about a thing that make it that thing. One element of Baroque, which is a style of architecture, is fancy facades, which we'll talk about in a moment. Here's an example sentence with element. Jazz music features some improvised elements, which makes it different from many other kinds of music.
那我们第二天的课文呢，就是要延续上一次讲到的大稻埕建筑。那你可以在这个区域看到巴洛克式的建筑，就是其中一个深受欧洲文化影响的例子。那我们常常会看到是比较装饰繁复的正门或是正面。那这类的巴洛克元素呢，会被在里面看到。那 element 是名词，意思就是元素或者是要素，也就是构成某个东西特别的内容物。在这边的巴洛克式建筑来说呢，它的要素就会是一些装饰繁复的建筑物正面的设计。
Now this next word is one of my favorite words in the world. It's the word fancy. F-A-N-C-Y. Fancy is an adjective and it means not plain or simple, but has lots of decorations or extra parts. Something that we describe as fancy is usually expensive looking, detailed, and complicated in design. An example sentence with fancy could be, My sister likes to wear fancy dresses when she goes to parties.
那 fancy 是形容词，意思就是高级的，或者是设计装饰很繁复或者花俏的。We can say that it is the opposite of simple. Now, if I'm wearing a fancy dress, that probably means that the dress has lots of designs on it. 那另外像看到了 such as 比如或者是举例诸如此类的，那后面呢我们会接一个名词。那另外还有 facade 是名词，指的就是建筑物的正面，也就是有门口的那一面。
So I know your French is very good, and you said the word facade in a very good French accent.
I did.
It's a French word?
It is a French word.
We have so many French words in English. You know, another way we can use the word fancy, which is very specific to British English, we can use it as a verb, which means you have a crush on somebody.
Yeah, I fancy chocolate.
Yeah, or you really want to have something. Yeah. I fancy a chocolate bar. Or if I say, I fancy Nikki, that means I have a crush on you. Oh, stop. Back to the article, and here's an example of some of that Baroque architecture. One such example is the Chen Tianlai residence, which was built in the 1920s by a rich tea trader. So, yesterday we learned the word merchant, which is a noun, and it's a person who sells things. A trader is something quite similar. It's a person who trades things. Basically, another word for a businessman.
那这样的建筑呢，我们在陈天来的住所可以看到。这个地方是在1920年的时候，有一个有钱的茶商所建造的。那 trader 指的就是商人或者是贸易商。那其实跟我们前面看到的 merchant 很类似。那 trade 是动词，意思就是交易啊，或者是贸易的意思。像是台北世贸中心就是 Taipei World Trade Center.
Very good. Back to the article and a new style of architecture, red brick Western style shop houses. This style is very specific to areas where foreign trade took place. The article used the word specific here, which is an adjective. Specific means clearly defined or identified. It's the opposite of vague. If we're talking about something specific, we're talking about one special kind of thing, not lots of different kinds of things. Something specific is special and is different from the other things. So by saying this style is very specific to areas where foreign trade took place, the article is explaining that that style of architecture is special and can only be seen in particular places, not everywhere. Here's an example sentence. You can only see the northern lights at specific times of the year, so plan your trip carefully.
那接下来呢，要介绍另一种风格的建筑了，也就是红砖西式街屋。那这样子的设计呢，是在贸易地区特有的建筑风格。Specific 是形容词，意思就是特定的或者是特有的。在这边的意思就是说，这样的设计并不是说走在路上都会看到，那要在那些有外国国外贸易商来台设厂的地方才会看到的设计。那 specific 的另一个意思呢，会是明确的或者是具体的，像是我们在描述东西事情的时候 we need to be more specific when describing something. Otherwise, people might not know what we're talking about.
Very true. Yeah, this kind of architecture, the red brick style, is what I think of when I think about this part of the city. I think it's what it's most famous for.
Yeah, the red brick.
Yeah, super cool.
They're not tall.
They're not tall. And they're usually kind of very square buildings. Sometimes they have those pillars outside. I think they're really beautiful. And they kind of remind me of some architecture you might see in the UK.
Oh, really?
The house that I grew up in was a red brick house.
Oh.
A Victorian era house. So it was very old and full of ghosts. Well, back to the article and more about these buildings. Western companies would export Taiwanese products around the world, so they built their Taiwanese bases. The word export here is a verb, and to export means to send products out of the country to sell them to another place. Exports, if we're adding an S, is a noun, the things that you send out of the country. So Taiwan exports many things, but most famously, Taiwan exports computer chips. China exports lots of stuff. Pretty much anything that you can see around you was probably made in China. Whereas other countries like the UK, we don't have so many exports. We have more imports, which is when you bring things into the country. Here's an example sentence. French cheeses are exported to many different countries.
the fromage. 那 export 是动词，意思就是出口或者是输出，也就是说把某个产品销到别的国家去的意思。那在这边课文的意思就是说，那时候西方人的商行会出口，会把台湾的一些产品卖到世界各地去。那如果相反的是进口的话呢，我们就用 import 这个字。
So import and export are big features of international trade, right? And the reason that we import and export things is because one country cannot make everything that they need.
Exactly. For the weather, for the climate.
Yeah. Taiwan's a pretty small country, so it needs to import a lot of other stuff to feed its people. We also saw the word product, which we've used a few times already, so let's clarify what that means. Product is a noun, and a product is a thing you can sell. A thing that has been made to sell, usually for business reasons. Pretty much anything can be a product. Food, clothes, games, cars. If you sell it, it is a product. Here's an example sentence. The electronics store will be selling new computer products next week.
那这些进出口的东西呢，就会是 product 产品了。那 product 是名词，意思就是产品或者是产物，这边指的就是比较具体要卖出去的东西。那除了商品、产品之外呢 ，product 还有结果的意思 ，the result or something.
Yeah, and product is also related to the verb produce, right? Which means to make something. So a product is something that has been produced. Back to the article, it says locals also used buildings like these for selling goods, especially along Dihua Street. The word especially is an adverb, and it's used to single out one person or thing over all of the others. If we use this word, it means we want the listener to know that we are highlighting one thing in particular. This thing is more important to the context than the other things. For example, I like all fruits, especially mangoes. By saying locals also used buildings like these for selling goods, especially along Dihua Street, the article means that these buildings were used for selling things in many places, but Dihua Street was particularly famous for this reason. Here's an example sentence. I love going to the park, especially on warm summer evenings.
那课文接着说，除了外国商人之外，当地的商人也会在这边的建筑卖他们的产品，而且特别是在迪化街。Especially 是副词，意思是特别地或者是尤其，也可以说是 in particular 的意思。其实就是要强调某个东西的意思。在这边课文的意思就是说，其实这样的建筑啊，还可以在别的地方看到，但是在迪化街是更容易看到的，而且更多的。那例句就说，我喜欢去公园，特别是在温暖的夏天傍晚的时候。
It's true. It's my favorite time to go to the park.
I don't go to the park.
Why? Too many mosquitoes? Really?
Yeah, but I have to walk my dog.
That's true. You just run through the park so the mosquitoes can't get you. Well, back to the article, it says, they would live in the same building, hence the name shop house. And they here is referring to the traders. The word hence here is an adverb, H-E-N-C-E, and hence is just another way of saying as a consequence, or more simply, for this reason.
那这些商人除了在这边做贸易之外，他们同时还住在这里，所以才会叫这些地方 shop houses 店屋或者是街屋。Hence 是副词，意思就是因此、所以的意思。那其实跟我们前一天看到的 as a result 用法很像，都是在表示一个结果的意思。
Okay, well, back to the article, and now we're moving away from the West and back to the East in terms of architecture styles. It's time to talk about Hokkien Teng Aka. While some buildings found in Da稻埕are Western style, others are very much Asian.
那接着课文又介绍到了最后一个建筑风格，也就是丁阿卡。 那课文说到，在大稻埕这边有些建筑是西式的风格，但是还有很多是亚洲风格的建筑。在这边我们看到这个文法句型 some and others， 意思就是说用两类的东西来做举例，但是我们并没有特别限定它的范围，也就是说有些建筑是西式的，那另外有一些是中式的，总数的范围是没有限定的，它只是举例两个类别来说。那意思就是有一些，然后还有另一些。Others 等同于 other 加上一个复数的名词，用这个句型我们造一个句子。Some people dream of making lots of money, but others dream of having enough to be comfortable. 那就是说，有些人梦想可以赚大钱，但是另一些人梦想拥有刚好的钱，可以舒适的过活。也就是说，另外其他人的想法是什么，我们无法得知。
So returning to the article, now we're learning more about this Hokkien style.In Tengaka architecture, the upper floors extend to the roadside, but the ground floor is recessed. Okay, well, before we talk about those complicated architectural language, let's talk about the word extend. It's a verb, and to extend means to cause to cover a large or wide area. If something extends outwards or upwards, it takes up a large space.We also saw the word recessed, which is an adjective which is quite specific to architecture. If something is recessed, it is set or built in a recess in the surrounding wall or surface. A recessed wall is a part of the wall that kind of goes in like this. There's a gap that goes in.
那这样的建筑呢，其实就是我们现在看到的骑楼。那 extend 是动词，意思就是延伸或者是扩展。那在这边课文的意思比较物理一点，意思就是说他们的2楼地板是延伸出去到外面的路上的。那 recessed 是形容词，意思就是它往内缩的意思。
So I'm imagining this in my mind. The second floor goes out over the sidewalk or the street, but underneath it's kind of empty because it's recessed backwards. Super interesting.Well, there's an explanation as to why the buildings are designed this way. The article continues, this leaves room for shops and a sidewalk, and the upper floors gain more inside space. Many tea shops made in this style can be found along Ganzhou Street.
Oh, that's why. They need places to sell.
Yeah. That's pretty intelligent, huh?
Yeah.
So upstairs they can maybe store things, or perhaps they might even live up there.
Yeah, they live there.
But now they've got extra space downstairs underneath the second floor to sell things and keep dry when it's wet.
Exactly.
Very intelligent. Well, that's all we have for this 2-day article about architecture in Taipei's oldest district. Hope you learned something interesting. We certainly did. Let's go to our For You Chat question.
For You Chat.
Today's For You Chat question, I'll pitch it to you first, Nikki. Do you know of any other architecture styles? Talk about them.
Personally, I really like Gothic architecture.
Spooky.
It's spooky and it's dark and it's very dark and sad.
Yeah. It's often using kind of very pointy things, right? And interesting shaped windows. In which countries might you see more Gothic architecture?
In Germany.
Yeah. There's that super famous castle called Nietzsche. I don't know the name of it. But it's a big castle in a forest in Germany. And it's very Gothic looking.
Castles and cathedrals.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for example, Notre Dame de Paris.
Yes, very Gothic. You guys can maybe go onto Google and look up Gothic architecture, and you'll see some very European, maybe churches or other buildings that are kind of spooky, and it looks like vampires might live inside them.
Yeah, like you have bats in there.
Yeah, I like it too. I like the imperial Chinese style architecture. So the kind of architecture you might find in Beijing, in the Forbidden City, in the Gugong. You know, they have these huge, wide buildings with the really fancy, delicately designed eaves, which are the roof parts that hang over. And they're carved with lots of different animals and symbols. And they use really beautiful colors to paint them too, like bright red or blue or gold. I think they're just so pretty to look at. Well, you can think about this question too. What other kinds of architecture styles do you know about? Maybe you can talk about them with your friends and show each other some pictures on the internet. That's all we have for now. We'll see you next time, and let's go to Dihua and buy some snacks.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go.
Vocabulary Review. Element. There are pop art elements in this artist's style, but her work is still very unique. Fancy. This hotel is so fancy. Look at all these beautiful lights and plants in our room. Specific. This language is specific to a small island near Scotland, where people have spoken it for thousands of years. Export. A lot of Taiwan's farm goods like rice and tea are exported to other countries around the world. Product. We have some great hair products here, like shampoo, hair color, creams, and oils. Especially. Don't tell this to anyone, especially John. He'll want to tell the whole world.
智慧小补帖
Facade. Hence. Extend. Recessed.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作，活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net